What's the difference between panic and anxiety?
When we look at the neuroscience, there isn't a huge amount of differences, but our lived experience can be really different. So when we look at the literature that describes panic and anxiety, the best go-to source that we use in psychology and medicine is the DSM, which is this giant book. It's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. It's this huge book, and it has the distinguishments between what's anxiety and what's panic. But the usefulness kind of stops there and saying, oh, well, this came out of the blue and therefore it's panic, as opposed to this was an intensification of kind of a low grade continuous anxiety. So therefore it's an anxiety attack. But that doesn't really give us a lot of information in terms of why it's happening and what to do about it. And so when I look at the research, we can see that there's, I call it the stoplight of autonomic arousal. When we start on one end of the stoplight, we think of the green light. The green light is go, it's calm, it's relaxed. It's what you feel like when you're kind of just chilling with your friends. You're in the flow, you're sleeping, you're creative. Maybe you're writing and you're relaxing. So that's your green light. And there are ways that your body feels when you're in the green light. There's the way that your emotions and your thoughts present when you're in the green light. And there are things that you do in your habits and your behaviors that reflect that. And so the first step is to just, if you've ever been in the green zone, and some people I've worked with haven't, they kind of live their life in a semi-state of arousal, just kind of yellow to red. But if you've been in the green, really becoming familiar with what gets you there and what that looks like in the mind, body, thoughts, and behaviors is the first step. And then we work our way up the continuum and we start to see the yellow zone. And if, we drive, we see a yellow light, we have to figure out, am I going to slow down and stop, or am I just going to speed up and get through it? And so similarly with nervous system, when we start to become aroused, whether that's getting more annoyed or angry or worried or anxious, or maybe even feeling like a little bit sad or despairing, is that we see the body starts to change to help us be more protected in that state. And there are a lot of different ways that can manifest. And I'll get into some of the nuance in that presentation. It's the 9 types of anxiety. But when you think about that, we're starting to think that perhaps your breathing picks up, your heart rate speeds up, your body temperature rises, your thoughts speed up, or maybe they become a little bit more loopy or fixated or worried. Perhaps this happens when you go to bed at night and you notice, like, gosh, I feel my heart in my chest and I feel like my thoughts just won't stop cycling. So those may be signs that you're in the yellow light zone. So that second step is to figure out what that feels like in the body, in the emotions and the thoughts for you, and you're becoming a little activated. And then, so that could be generalized anxiety in the DSM, that's just low grade, continuous, kind of on the spectrum of generalized anxiety. But then panic, sheer panic, terror. I'm sure I'm going to die. I'm sure that my heart is going to burst out of my chest. I'm sure that it's over. I'm sure that I'm having a stroke. Whatever those crisis thoughts are, is those are reflective of the red light zone. And this is crisis mode. And so that's sheer panic. And so when we start to look at what that is on the spectrum, that gives us a lot more power to create interventions that are actually going to work. And one of the most common things that I hear from my clients are, while I was having a panic attack and someone told me to just calm down and breathe. Or another person will say to me is, I was about to go on stage. I work with a lot of high performing influencers and CEOs and creators. And they're like, I was about to go on stage and I had a panic attack. And so I went to my doctor and they're like, well, take a benzo, take a Xanax. And then they're zombied out. They can't perform. And so it's a mismatch. So it's not that breathing is ineffective and it's not that a benzo is never appropriate. It's about, where am I on that continuum? What is the root cause of that? And what are the treatments that are going to get me the best results? So that's kind of a new, perhaps, perspective of looking at anxiety versus panic.
Right. And so as I'm hearing you describe that, are panic attacks caused, do you think, by just your nervous system being completely overstimulated and anxiety and things like stress not being taken care of on a long-term basis? Or can this also just be something that just pops up where you have something that happens in the moment that just forces your nervous system into an all-out panic?
There's always a reason for panic and anxiety. Our body doesn't just go rogue on us and create these terrible feelings for the pure joy and fun of it. There's always a reason. But what's tricky is how to figure out what that reason is. And I would argue that panic attacks rarely come out of the blue. Well, the speed can for sure vary from person to person. Some people, it can be a low simmer, like a champagne bottle, you shake it and the pressure builds, versus other people, they may not be as attuned to maybe the canaries, those little metaphorical signals that something is awry. And then the panic feels like it comes out of the blue. But panic, if we start to change the conversation to acknowledging that the body is doing what it's designed to do to keep you safe, and then we figure out what it may be responding to, associating to, reacting to, then suddenly it opens up a whole world that's beyond doing breathing and taking Xanax. Suddenly our body is our collaborator and our empowerer, which I know is a big part of your message, is how we can leverage our experiences in order to live a greater, more empowered, more expansive life. And I think changing the conversation about anxiety to our collaborator does just that.
Right. And so could you walk the audience? Because I think a lot of people, unless they've actually had a full-on anxiety or panic attack, they don't understand like what it is. Like maybe they've had one and they didn't realize what it was. Maybe they've seen somebody kind of be excessively paranoid out and about, or just have this massive bout of intense stress or anxiety and don't know what's going on. So if you could walk the audience through, like from a mental and physical standpoint, I think they'd appreciate that.
Yeah. When we look at all of the research on how autonomic arousal presents in people, we can distill it down into 9 systems. And before I get into those 9 systems, there's some language that I'm using. And just in case people may not be familiar with it, I'm saying autonomic arousal. And what does that actually mean? And so your body is designed to go into different states that are regulated in part by your nervous system, your brain, your spinal cord, your peripheral nervous system, the nerves that regulate your heart and your senses, your fingers, even your enteric nervous system, which is the nervous system of the gut. And so when our body senses danger or it gets activated, whether it's something someone said or a smell or an event or overstimulation, as you said, then it will create a whole domino of changes that we associate with autonomic arousal. And so how does that show up? When you're in autonomic arousal, sympathetic arousal, that fight, flight, freeze, is there are approximately 9 different ways it shows up. And depending on the way that your body is uniquely communicating, can give us a whole bunch of information about what to do. And so the 9 types. So the first type is chest anxiety. And so you may feel like your heart is racing, it's pounding. Sometimes people will feel like they're having a heart attack and they'll go to the emergency room. And there was this research study that was done, and I write about it in my book, Panic Proof, that 80% of emergency department visits where people are coming in thinking they're having a heart attack, it's actually a panic attack because they can feel so similar. That elephant sitting on your chest, people may even feel that pressure radiating to their jaw. Reflux can feel like a heart attack for some people. That's a different type of anxiety, but it can present quite similarly. And so chest anxiety can also show up in the respiratory tract. This is anything in the chest area. So I was working with an Olympic athlete years ago, and one of the biggest ways that his body produced autonomic arousal to help him be an athlete was to have his heart beat faster, for his respiratory speed to get faster. And so then he became almost stuck or didn't continue to adapt once he retired out of the Olympics. And he dealt a lot with air hunger. So he felt like, I take a breath and I'm not getting any oxygen. And so then he would breathe deeper and try to breathe harder. And then he would get muscle tension and then he would get dizzy because he's hyperventilating. So this is all chest anxiety. Do you resonate with that? Does that show up in your chest or your lungs at all?
I mean, it has when I've had really bad bouts of anxiety. I haven't had that in a really long time, but yeah, I definitely recognize what you're talking about.
I see that super commonly, which is why I start there. The other really common manifestation, so the second type, is nervous system anxiety. And so when we go into autonomic arousal, it affects our nervous system. Our body is sending adrenaline, and adrenaline affects the way that our nerves are. We want to be able to run from the tiger. We want to be able to survive. And so the nervous system is part of what regulates that. And so when we get aroused and we get fearful, we may notice numbness and tingling. So the nervous system isn't prioritizing the tip of your nose or your fingertips. It's sending blood supply and energy to your runaway muscles, like your heart, your legs, right? And so some people will say, oh my gosh, I feel like the left side of my face is numb, or I feel like my fingers are tingling. I worked with a woman once years ago. She would get tingling all over her scalp, and she was so afraid that she was having a stroke. And she got all the appropriate exams. She saw the doctors and specialists, and it was anxiety. And so that was interesting data about what was uniquely out of balance so we could help her get better. So nervous system, it can show up also with tension of the muscles. So if you find that you're sitting with your shoulders shrugged all day, or you get tension headaches or migraine headaches or jaw tension. Some people, they get TMJ. They get soreness in their mouth and their tongue and their jaw. And so this is all the nervous system. In fact, today I just talked with somebody over in Italy, and she has nervous system anxiety. It always causes migraine headaches, and it's always associated with increased amounts of stress. And so when we're doing the work on that, her nervous system anxiety gets better and her headaches go away. So then we have gut anxiety. And so our gut is a place of knowing, gut intuition, like, ooh, I feel it in my gut. This is going to be great. Or I feel that drop in my gut. I feel doom. I feel churning. Somebody I talked to recently, when she gets anxious, she gets diarrhea. She has to run to the bathroom. I see this a ton in kids. And so if any of your audience members have kids and they're going back to school and they're getting tummy aches or they're getting gassy or bloated, that is part of gut anxiety. And so that can cause upper gut, like the reflex that we were talking about earlier, that can feel like a heart attack. Anxiety can cause that. And we can feel anxious as a result of reflex. It's kind of the fear of the fear. And so it's like, which is it, the chicken or the egg? So the gut. And then we have thought anxiety. And so there are 4 types, which I talk about in my book. And we don't have to get into all the nuance today, but do your thoughts become anxious thoughts? Do they become looping? Do they become obsessive? Do they become disturbing? When we think about the composite of ways that our brain is trying to protect us, one of our adaptive mechanisms for many people is to try to think their way through it, right? They're like analyzing, like, if they say this, I'm going to do that. What if this happens? They start to find themselves future tripping. Or they may find themselves obsessing. Like I worked with someone years ago who had this anxious thought that she'd run someone over. She would have to turn around and drive back again and again to look at the place because her brain was so sure that she did something egregious and ran someone over. And that's a specific type of OCD, but it's thought anxiety. It's anxiety that shows up in the thoughts. And so then we have, let's see what other, we have endocrine anxiety. And this is endocrine anxiety. Endocrine system is your hormones. This is testosterone. This is cortisol. This is estrogen, progesterone. This is thyroid hormone. And this I see all the time misdiagnosed. I had a woman many years ago. I write about her in the book. Her name is Charlotte. And she came in to see me and she was expressing how her doctor had told her that she just needed to do more breath work and meditation. But her heart was racing. She was losing weight. She was really, really anxious. She was having panic attacks, these flares and symptoms head to toe. Her doctor's like, you're anxious. You just had some kids. You're stressed out, do some breathing. So turns out when she went and got a second opinion and had thyroid testing done that she was in a thyroid storm. She had too much thyroid hormone, and too much thyroid hormone was producing all of these symptoms in addition to feeling anxiety. And so that's endocrine anxiety. And that can, so when we think about, well, what is my composite of symptoms? It allows us to do a little bit of deeper diving to figure out what might be causing that. And so she had all sorts of hyperthyroid symptoms, but they can often look similar to anxiety. And so thankfully she got the answers and got back on track. So that's endocrine anxiety. Immune system anxiety. Are you a person who has allergies at all? Do you get like stuffy nose, itchy, watery eyes, or are you like one of the lucky few who doesn't?
No, I definitely struggle with allergies from time to time.
Yeah. So that chemical, right, that creates the itchy, the watery eyes, the itchy nose. Sometimes it's like we just like have postnasal drip and we're swallowing it. That chemical, histamine, that is behind many people's experiences of anxiety is also as activating of the autonomic nervous system as adrenaline. So sometimes people will take an antihistamine like Benadryl and they're like, oh my gosh, I don't feel anxious. In fact, I could take a nap. Right? So immune system anxiety can come as data from the body that there's something that's out of balance in the immune system. So histamine, if it's histamine related, then we can ask the question, well, why is histamine related? Am I intaking too much histamine? Do I have an imbalance in my gut microbiome where I have histamine producing bacteria? Or maybe I'm not detoxing histamine. There are 3 main pathways for detoxing histamine. And maybe I have a problem where that isn't working for me. And my body's like, well, we're giving you the allergy symptoms. You're not doing anything about it or treating the root cause. So now we're going to tell you in other ways. And so mast cell activation syndrome, post-strep infections, we see long haul COVID symptoms. We see Epstein-Barr, mono. We see all sorts of immune system related things that lupus, autoimmune disease, Hashimoto's thyroid, Crohn's disease, you name it. All of these conditions can have anxiety as a part of it. And the anxiety can be the leader or it can be one of the concomitants that can be alongside of it. So there's immune system anxiety. There's a lot of these, right? Can show up in a lot of different ways. And then there's trauma anxiety, which I am particularly passionate about because this looks at all of the symptoms that we experience and it gives it context for why. Because your body, your mind, your genetics, your nervous system, all of that has adapted to what happened to you and what did not happen to you. And this could have started with your ancestors. We think about the effects of the Dutch famine and how people who went through the Dutch famine passed along epigenetic traits that resulted in their ancestors struggling to lose weight. So it turned on these thrifty genes. And then these individuals, by no fault of their own behaviors or habits or any actual tangible things that we could put our fingers on, this was something that they inherited, right? And it's the same with inherited trauma. It's the same with the neonatal environment. It's the same with what we experienced, our early adaptive experiences. And in your body's great wisdom, it helps you adapt to that. And I'd love to share with you a metaphor because I love and live with metaphors. Would you be open? So think about it like a coat. So I live in Michigan half the year. It's very cold here, 8 months of the year. And so in order to not get frostbite, I put on a coat. And so this is a metaphor for maybe you grew up in an environment that was really stressful, really difficult. Maybe you had abuse in the family, or maybe you had neglect in the family, or maybe your job in the family was to try to manage everybody else and you were the gifted parentified child. And so in order to survive, we adapt. And those adaptive mechanisms enable us to survive, because if we weren't able to adapt, we probably wouldn't survive. Our human race wouldn't continue to survive. And so that's like putting on a coat. And the thing that a lot of people, I think, are starting to become more aware of is that these adaptations occur from head to toe. So your behaviors adapt, your gut microbiome adapts, your immune system adapts, your attachment patterns adapt, your thinking patterns adapt, everything adapts. You put the coat on and it warms your whole body. Everything adapts. But then the question is do you continue to adapt? Do you have the resources, the agency, the drive, whatever it is that you need in order to continue to adapt? So now half the year I also live in Arizona. If I kept that coat on in Arizona, it would be maladaptive. That coat that helped me survive in Michigan is no longer useful and actually could be problematic when I live in Arizona. And so if you do not continue to adapt, if we don't have that nervous system flexibility, if we don't have that ability to timestamp something as past, then those adaptations that once were helping us survive now become problematic for us. You have this coat on in the summer, this coat on in Arizona. And so what we want to do with that information is we want to reprogram those adaptations. And so we're starting to see that with trauma-informed neuroscience. And so neuroscience is starting to say, oh my gosh, the brain and the nervous system are adaptive. They're plastic. They can change. But it doesn't stop there. And that's why, if we kind of circle back to your whole question, why is it important to know the different ways that panic shows up, all those 9 different types that we kind of took a little peek into, is because all of the nuance in the presentation of our symptoms, all the way from the green light to the red light, tell us the story of how you adapted. And they give us clues on how to reprogram, recalibrate your entire body, your immune system, your hormones, your nervous system, your thoughts, your behaviors. And so that is the gift of our symptoms.
And I think that once we understand where this all comes from, I think people are like, all right, like I understand where my anxiety, stress, panic comes from. Like, what can I do about it? And I think like the number one thing people are concerned with when they are having like a intense bout of anxiety is, how do I self-regulate? Based on research, what do you think's the fastest way for somebody to instantly reduce a bout of panic or anxiety in the moment?
In the moment would be a little bit different than what you do next. And so in the moment, let's say that you're about to go on stage, you're about to host a podcast, you're about to go into a board meeting, you're driving on the interstate at 70 miles an hour, and you don't have the time, the permission, the space, the bandwidth, or the resources to then really truly clear why it's happening. But in the moment, if I only had one strategy that I would pick, is I would go straight to the vagus nerve. And we have many ways to hack the vagus nerve, and we can talk about some of my favorites. But the vagus nerve is not Vegas as in slot machines. I know you know this because this is like your work. But for those who are listening, is vagus nerve is wandering in Latin. And this is the longest wandering nerve in your body. And so it goes from the brain, it goes through the pharynx in your throat, it goes through the diaphragm, all the way down where it junctures with the enteric nervous system, or the nervous system of the gut. And it's a bidirectional communication highway between the gut and the brain. And it turns out that your gut is doing most of the talking. And so when we go into autonomic arousal, we have the power of the vagus nerve to switch us back into calm. The vagus nerve can be instantaneous. This is how the vagus nerve has the power to go wrong. So I come back from a trip to Miami. I got some sort of like glorious plague in Miami. And I was like, I need an IV. I feel awful. So I go and I get an IV. And I'm sitting there. And so I practiced medicine for many years. And when I was practicing medicine, I used to do IVs and things. And I always remember learning bubbles in the line are bad. Do not get bubbles in the line. And so I'm sitting there and she's got the bag hooked up and I'm like having a good old time. It's great. She's like, oh, do you want this immune system booster? And I'm like, immune system booster, count me in. So she's like pumping, mixing all up the stuff, and then she puts it into the bag, and I'm watching as all of these bubbles go into the line and they go into the bag, right? And so I'm like, well, I'm going to die. And so I kind of look at her and I'm like, that's a lot of bubbles. And she's like, oh, that's not very many bubbles. It's okay. You're going to be fine. And so my logical brain's like, okay, she saw the bubbles. She thinks I'm going to be fine. But my autonomic nervous system was like, we're dying. So she walks away and I have a panic attack. But it's an interesting panic attack because it was a vasovagal regulated panic attack. So I look at my husband and I'm like, I'm going to have a vasovagal attack, get the nurse. And so I broke into a cold sweat. My blood pressure crashed. I felt my heart was like pounding, but pounding slowly. And I threw up and it was this whole mess. And so that's an instantaneous vasovagal reaction. The vagus nerve is like, we're going to shut down. We're going to plummet the blood pressure. We're going to shut you down, make you pass out so that gravity can pull blood to the brain and try to preserve the brain. So that story is how it could go wrong. But the vagus nerve is very powerful. So the question that follows is, well, how do we hack the vagus nerve? But not in such an extreme way, right? We don't want people to be like panicking or throwing up. It doesn't have to be that way. But my favorite tangible strategy is to use cold. This comes out of Marshall Linehan's dialectical behavioral therapy research, DBT, and she teaches about the dive response, where deep sea divers, they observed, would go deeper and deeper and deeper into ocean, and they would have, they called the dive response, where their autonomic nervous system would shift from arousal into calm. And we can reproduce that with cold. And so she used to teach to stick your face in a bucket of ice water. And that's effective, but let's face it, not all of us walk around with a bucket of ice water, right? It's not a very practical solution. So how can we make that practical? So I build these things for people. I teach people how to make what I call a panic pack. So it's like a bag or a fanny pack or a purse or like a pencil case. And inside of it, we have strategies for hacking the vagus nerve and activating that calm brainstem, calming the brain. And so you can buy, if you've ever been online and you see first aid kits, they can have these chemical packs inside of them where they're small, they're shaped like the size of a deck of cards, and you can shake it and mix it up, and then it becomes cold. And so you can keep something small like that even in your back pocket. And if you start having a panic attack or your body's producing any number of these anxiety symptoms, you can shake that up, put it on your face, around your eyes in 30-second increments, and that works really fast. So that's one tangible hack. My number one practical, you can get that now, order it overnight online, put it in your pocket and take it with you that you can use for panic.
And then as far as like long-term strategies, I think it's one thing to self-regulate in the moment, but if you don't like adjust your lifestyle or sleep or behaviors, I think eventually this will end up repeating itself, and then you really won't like recalibrate your body like we've kind of been talking about. What do you think are the most effective things people must do on a long-term basis to dramatically reduce the risk of having anxiety, panic, etc.?
Yeah. What you deny is going to amplify, and what you resist is going to persist. And so I just talked to a patient earlier, and she was talking about how she's worked so hard and she's done so much work. She's done trauma work. She's been regulating her nervous system. She's been doing this great gut work, but she's kind of put herself into a state where I need to be calm. I need to be parasympathetic. I need to be copacetic. She's mastered that. And I was like, okay, you've gone through the first 3 steps, but now you need to go to step 4. And step 4 is where we start to master the process of having power over our adaptations. Because we have thousands of coats that are associated with thousands of different experiences that we could dig into if we had another hour and could talk about parts work and internal family systems. But we don't want to stop at just calming the body and calming the nervous system. We want to reprogram it. Instead of being out of control, which is what people say with panic and anxieties, I feel so out of control. I feel so powerless. My world is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Is now that we've learned how to master and calm the nervous system, now we want to recalibrate it and reprogram it. And so I actually have broken this down into 4 steps. It's called the panic reset, and I'll teach you those today. So step 1, you experience arousal. You're noticing those canaries. You're noticing, I was in green, I was chill, I was calm, but now I'm noticing, ooh, my breath is picking up a little bit. I feel like I just can't quite feel my fingers a little bit. Ooh, my heart rate, my body temperature. I'm just noticing I'm in the yellow zone. So what we see with the nervous system in the brain is that when we start shifting into arousal, different networks of the brain will change. And so in arousal, we see an emotional part of the brain starting to take over, and we call this the default mode network. And so this is your amygdala. This is the more emotional part of the brain and other associated networks. And I want you to think about this like you're driving your car down the highway, you're in cruise control, and if nothing changes, you'll drive from one coast to the other and end up in the ocean, right? This is default mode. This is different than the executive control network. This is your executive team. This is your dream team. This is your analytical team. This is your corporate board. This is your confidants. This is your ability to think about nuance and to look at the situation and to say, is this a trigger? Is this me? Is this somebody else? It's like analytical central, right? So what we see in the neuroscience is that when we start to get activated and we're going into the yellow zone and all the way into the red zone, is that your autopilot mode kicks in. Your default mode network takes over. And so many people, like we talked about in the example earlier of that mismatch, is so many people are like, oh, well, is it really logical to be anxious right now? I shouldn't feel anxious. Maybe I mustn't feel anxious. We call this masturbation or shouldsturbation, right? I mustn't, but your logical brain isn't on board. So the first step is to change that. When you're feeling anxious and your body is going into autopilot mode and your default mode network is kicking in, you can't think rationally and clearly because your logical executive team, they're not on board. So we have to get them on board. And by getting them on board, then you'll be able to manage it. But the first step is exactly what you just asked, is what's something quick that we can do to calm the nervous system, to get you out of autopilot mode. So use your panic pack. So this is talking about temperature. So cold shower, cold on the face, cold on the back, cold on the chest. This is using scent. So there's tons of research into olfaction and how olfaction can activate the nervous system. It can activate the brain. It can stimulate the vagus nerve. Particular research has been done on lavender, rose, ylang ylang. So you can use olfaction. You can use other smells. It could be like going to Sears. Maybe someone feels calmed by the smell of rubber tires, whatever it is that is supportive for you. So you want to calm the nervous system, get your logical brain back on board. So that's step number one. For you, I'm curious, what is your favorite way? Do you have something that's like pretty reliable for you that like gets you back like in your zone, in your body, feeling calm?
This episode is brought to you by Jasper. Indoor air can be up to 5 times more polluted than outdoor air. From dust and allergens to harmful chemicals, it's everywhere, even if you can't sense it. That's where Jasper comes in, an air purifier that goes beyond the ordinary to truly transform the air in your home. Whether you have allergies, pets, or just want to breathe cleaner, healthier air, Jasper is designed to help. This isn't your run-of-the-mill air purifier. Jasper combines industrial-strength filtration with an elegant design that seamlessly blends into your home decor. Jasper uses top-tier hospital-grade filtration to capture particles as small as 0.1 microns. That means it's catching allergens, dust, and even mold. And the best part, it's whisper quiet. You'll barely even notice when it's running. Breathing cleaner air can lead to better sleep, less congestion, fewer allergy flare-ups, and overall improved wellness. Imagine waking up feeling refreshed because the air around you is actually clean. If you've met Shadow, you know he's a big shedder, but it's the price that you pay for love. With that said, I've had my Jasper for over a month, and I definitely sleep more soundly, and I am way less congested than before. The setup is super simple. Plug it in and let Jasper take care of the rest. There's no complicated installation, just clean air immediately. Right now, listeners of the Adversity Advantage podcast can get a special discount on Jasper. Head over to jasper.co, that's JASPR.co, and use the code Doug for $100 off each Jasper. Remember, Jasper isn't just about filtering air. It's about improving your health and quality of life while fitting seamlessly into your home. Don't compromise on something as vital as the air that you breathe. So head over to jasper.co and use the code Doug for $100 off. Now back to the show. Work, some sort of like exercise, moving my body. I mean, whether it's strength training or going for a walk or a run or something like that typically will help. I mean, I really don't, I mean, I say this and now, but I mean, as far as like being super dysregulated, I haven't gotten that way in a long time, like years and years. But I guess when I would, something like a slow run or some sort of movement would really help me like get back into the zone.
It sounds like you're really good at recalibrating your nervous system and your body when you're in the green, and maybe even before you go into yellow or red. Like you've figured out what works for you to keep yourself in that kind of chill green mode, which is amazing.
Well, I mean, and I had to go through the fire for a long time to figure all this out, right? And so a lot of it's just been practice or learned by doing. I mean, and so I've just had to develop what works for me. And then also I think, and this is the reason I wanted to bring this up, is like, how do we position our lives based on our habits and lifestyle to kind of put these guardrails up in place to help mitigate the potential for our nervous system becoming more unregulated than it needs to be.
We can totally expand on that. I really, really like that. One thought that's kind of coming to the forefront is the amount of data exposure that we experience. And we think about how even probably your grandparents, my grandparents, they didn't have this influx of stimulation and information that we have now. So we haven't, as a human race, biologically adapted as quickly as the stimulation increases happened. And so our brains and nervous system are generally exposed to over 11 billion bits of information a second, but we can only process like 50. And so that is significantly higher now that we have worldwide news at our fingertips, the latest scandal being pushed to our homepage on our phones, the highlight reels and the trauma reels on our social media platforms. We turn on the lights in the morning, disrupting our natural biological circadian rhythm. And so our entire modern way of living is incongruent with our biological adaptations. And so by default, we are seeing more of that autonomic arousal. And so as you're talking about, it's like, what are we even doing with our lifestyle and our bodies and our habits and our behaviors and our stimulation exposures? So that's one place that you can take a lot of power and leverage that in step one is calming the nervous system, is tangibly speaking, is put your phone in the other room. And when you wake up in the morning, don't look at your phone first thing. You're getting this cortisol surge, this biological cortisol surge, and that arousal is now being associated with whatever stress or overstimulation is coming from your screen, right? Instead of waking up and you hear the birds singing and the sun is rising and the wind is blowing through the leaves and you're connected to the earth, suddenly you see about an earthquake on the other side of the world and read about horrible doomsday things, or you get a bunch of unread messages from your boss or from your manager, from your email, whatever it is, it's very activating. So not only reactively calming the nervous system by hacking the vagus nerve is that we can be proactive and create an environment where we're regulating out the gate. So having a good boundary is really good. So then step two is now we need to practice recruiting and onboarding our wise and analytical mind. How do I strengthen my executive control network? So people live the vast majority of their lives dissociated on autopilot. And so for those who are listening, you dissociate. Everybody dissociates. On one end of the spectrum is like, I just drove to my office and I don't remember the drive. You dissociated. Or somebody else listening, if you like get into the flow and you lose track of time, that's dissociating, right? And so what we want to start doing is practicing onboarding and creating those neurosynaptic connections to the executive control network part of our brain so that they're more accessible, because the way you wire it is the way you're going to fire it. So if you haven't been challenging yourself and thinking critically and listening to this podcast and doing brain teasers and pushing yourself out of your analytical and logical comfort zone, then those connections haven't been formulated in your brain, and they're going to be less available to you as resources that you can use when crisis strikes. So that's the whole step 2 is strengthening your brain's ability to engage. And you do that, like the work that you do, like you are all about strengthening and engaging. So this not only for you as a creator and somebody who's out with this message to the world, but you're enabling other people to do that, which is just like amazing for you.
And I think for me personally, and just also from people that I've spoken to, I think one of the biggest things that can help is learning how to cultivate self-awareness in whatever way works for you with all this. Because, you know, if I'm more stressed or anxious on a given week or a given day, I could write down my habits and my behaviors that week. And I guarantee you that if I'm more stressed or more anxious, I guarantee you I've overcommitted myself somewhere, haven't gotten as much sleep. I have eaten poorly that week. I haven't gotten as much exercise, been staring at the screen too much. I mean, these are just some examples, but I think I invite people, at least from somebody who's gotten on the other side of all this, what's really helped me is to be able to understand what are the things that I'm personally doing on a daily basis and a weekly basis that's making my stress and anxiety worse. And then what are some of the things that improve my stress and my anxiety, where I know that if I am exercising 5-6 days a week, things are good. If I'm eating healthy 80 to 90% of the time, things are good. If I'm sleeping, 7 to 8 hours a night, things are good. What is your take on my anecdotal approach to the importance of self-awareness and habits and personal accountability?
It's brilliant. It's so good. And the proof is in the pudding, your lived experience. And so I really respect and admire that. And I wanted to add something for on the screen. So we've been having this conversation for, I don't have the time here, how long we've been talking, but there is something biologically that's happening. And so we have that filtration system that I was talking about, the billions of data points that are coming into the brain, and you have a salience network in the brain. And the job of the salience network is to say, is this relevant or is this relevant? Are we in danger? Are we not in danger? And this is all occurring outside of our conscious awareness. And so what the salience network is also doing is taking interoceptive data from the body, and then it's deciding if that's relevant or not. And so when we're sitting and looking at the screens, what happens is that if we're not rotating our neck on our shoulders, rotating our eyeballs, looking left and right, looking close and far, is that sends a freeze position pattern to the salience network. And then that will tell your amygdala, your emotional regulating part of the brain, that you're in danger. So someone's listening to this podcast and they're just scrolling on their phone and they haven't actually rotated their body out of a freeze position, that's going to stimulate autonomic arousal and they don't even know it. And so in addition to the brilliant suggestions that you made that are really practical and preventative, is like, have I been overextending myself? Have I moved my body? But it could be something as simple as just remember, maybe put a Post-it note on your computer or set an alarm on your watch that'll gently buzz you, that every 20 minutes or so, rotate your head, your eyes look far and near, because then you're going to interrupt that pattern that tells your brain that you're in danger. So I love that practical advice that you were providing. It's brilliant.
I appreciate that. I think people can relate to like the lived experience that I share, but I also like to kind of validate that with research and science, because again, like what works for me may not work for somebody else. Like somebody could be super emotionally like charged, and the last thing they want to do is go work out at the gym because they're like, oh my gosh, are people around me going to notice that I'm anxious? If I get my heart rate up even higher, what's that going to do? So I am careful with some of the things that I say and providing context with the fact that like this works for me. And I've been at this for well over a decade as far as working on my mental health. Have you found, like there's been people that have talked about the importance of taking care of things like diet and lifestyle and the people you spend time with as it relates to your ability to manage things like stress, anxiety, panic long term. Have you found that to be true in your research as well, as far as like the healthier you are physically, the healthier you'll be mentally?
Yes. And that goes back to the adaptive mechanisms. And so there's research into the gut-brain axis. There's a book that I love to recommend. It's called The Psychobiotic Revolution by Scott Anderson. He looks at collaboratively with these top researchers about the specific microbes that live in our gut and the effects that they have on the brain, the nervous system, our feelings, our thoughts, our behaviors. And psychobiotics have been categorized as bacteria that have psychoactive abilities, that they can attenuate your neurotransmitters. Like some bacteria make GABA, which is a relaxing neurotransmitter. Some bacteria make serotonin, which we associate with mood regulation. And that's what's the target of many medications like antidepressants such as Zoloft or Prozac. Some bacteria make dopamine. And your bacterial composition and behavior, and thus the effect on your hormones, your immune system, your nervous system, your mood, your thoughts, can change with every single bite that you eat. And so earlier we were talking about the Dutch famine and how things that happened 6 generations removed, that it takes a long time for us to then readapt to that. And that the sensory nervous system, all this information that's coming in that we haven't evolved to adapt to, it takes a long time to change epigenetic expression and on a fundamental root cause level. But your bacteria can change within moments. And the way that the bacteria are behaving and how they're coding your thoughts, your emotions. So you may be thinking about like, I'm going to have lunch here in 15 minutes and I'm kind of craving a taco. That's very likely coming from your microbiome. It's unlikely that that's just coming from like your higher self or your brain. It's a craving that's based on the composition of your microbiome. And so that microbiome has adapted to all of the things that have happened to you, that have not happened to you, and that continue to occur on a moment-to-moment basis. And so it's only logical to then conduct research looking at how we can leverage the microbiome, the immune system, your hormones, in order to complement new reprogramming of the brain, the body, and the nervous system in the goal of helping us feel more calm, feel more empowered, feel more energized, have a higher libido, feel more alive than ever before, as opposed to just like, how can I make the symptoms go away? What adaptive mechanisms can I actually leverage and reprogram so that we're not stuck wearing a Michigan coat in Arizona, but I can actually heal my body as a whole person? So yes, habits, diet, lifestyle, all of that is profoundly important.
And then I guess obviously the opposite is true. Like if you're looking to do everything you possibly can to make your stress, anxiety, panic worse, like eat poorly, spend time with people that don't bring the best out in you, don't sleep, don't exercise, don't have self-awareness, don't get help for your mental health. Like, would you say that research is clear on that if you're looking to make anxiety worse, like do those things?
Absolutely. Yeah. If you're like, I've never had panic in my life before, what is the prescription for panic? And it's those things that you just described.
Any other mistakes people make when battling anxiety? Because I think, when I was going through, I had really, really bad anxiety, like in my early 20s. People would say, just calm down. And obviously that doesn't work. And I learned that during that time that the more you like lean into feelings of stress and anxiety, the more it actually helps, because you're teaching your body that these physical symptoms are just a natural response and they're not here to hurt you. I think that's valid. I learned that from this book I think it was called Dare. I forget who wrote it.
Yeah, I remember that book.
And then also, like, is there any other mistakes people make when they're in the moment that make their anxiety worse?
I think being all or nothing, where I'm going to completely avoid it. Like earlier, I was talking about my client who's like, I've calmed my anxiety. I am done. And it's like, well, you can't live your life in a teeny little biodome and never be aroused again. So I think the biggest mistake that people make, in addition to avoidance, is trying to avoid or suppress or maybe send the energy somewhere else. The biggest mistake to avoiding it is then not recalibrating it. Think about it like if you're standing at the top of a mountain and for years and years and years, rain has been coming down and there's been grooves that have been dug into the mountain. And so then when the rain comes, the water will follow the path of least resistance. And so that's programming. of the mind, the body, and the nervous system and your other adaptive systems. And so what people will often try to do is just to like put a tent over the top of the mountain, or maybe they'll even try to figure out how to blow those rain clouds away so that the water doesn't come down. But the step that's really, really important after you've gone through step 1 of calming the body, step 2 of onlining your logical resources, step 3, which you actually brilliantly pointed out, is then having that awareness with your logical aware mind of what's happening in the body, is then step 4 is recalibrating, restructuring, and reorganizing those panic producing patterns. And so that would be going to the top of the mountain and then digging your own troughs and filling in the other ones. And the clinical research teaches us how to do this. We've seen this in the work of Bessel van der Kolk, you talked about earlier, who wrote The Body Keeps the Score. We've seen this in the neuroscience of Bruce Perry, who wrote What Happened to You with Oprah Winfrey. We've seen this again and again. The more we research it, the more we see that. And so what we want to do is we want to intentionally put our bodies in autonomic arousal with power and recalibration. So think about it this way. When we go through trauma, it's like your body's like starting a car and the starter's like revving the engine up, but then it doesn't ever turn over. The cycle isn't complete, right? And so then we go through what is called somatic reenactment. The body is trying to free you from whatever that cycle is. It's replaying it again and again and again. You're like, why am I doing this every time? X, Y, and Z, the same thing happens. So you have to close that loop. You have to complete that loop, which means that you have to put yourself from a place of power into something that arouses you. And then with your recalibration, you actually close that loop. And so how do we make that actually tangible? So when you do, and you exercise, you work out 6 days a week, you're doing that. But what you want to do is you want to be intentional about that. So I'm going to go into autonomic arousal. I'm going to interoceptively, I'm going to feel the body. I'm going to feel the adrenaline. I'm going to feel the muscles. I'm going to feel the tingling. I'm going to feel the rapid breathing. I'm going to feel the body temperature, all of the things. I'm going to feel it. I'm going to allow it to peak. I'm going to notice that. And then I'm going to put myself back into calm. I'm going to go from a sprint to a walk. Another example that Bessel talks about in Body Keeps the Score is high ropes courses, is doing something that feels arousing, maybe scary or dangerous, but is objectively safe, going up, putting yourself in the high ropes course, and then coming down, calming the body, going up, going into arousal, then coming down. You're creating nervous system flexibility. So other practices may be yoga, somatic experiencing, qigong, biofeedback, breath work, and creating a program where you're not getting stuck in those panic loops, but you actually teach your body how to come down. So that's the most important thing that I think is often left out.
Well, I think this is an amazing place for us to end our convo. So Dr. Nicole, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the pod, for sharing all your expertise. I think the audience is going to get a lot of value out of this. If they want to get panic proof, if they want to follow you on social media, where's the best place to do that?
Yeah, find me at Instagram. It's Dr. Nicole Cain, Cain. And then Panic Proof is wherever books are sold. You can find it at Barnes & Noble or Amazon. Just look up Panic Proof book.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Like I said, the audience is going to really enjoy this one.
Thank you so much. It's been a blast.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, I really think you're going to like this video as well. I'll see you there.